Welcome to the Darkstream, VoxDay, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. Now, some of you may recall during the election that National Review writer Kevin Williamson wrote a remarkably obnoxious piece that was published on National Review. And in that piece, he said that communities of lower class, poor white Americans deserve to die. And he was saying that they're not pulling their own weight. So therefore, there's no reason to try to preserve them. They have nothing to offer. They ought to just be allowed to die. Now, what you have to understand, of course, is that Kevin Williamson is poor white trash. That's his background. And there are certain people that are on the outskirts of the elite that have managed to scratch and claw and quote unquote improve themselves so that instead of being some nobody from a place where nobody amounts to anything, they're an intellectual, working for an important magazine, and they get to rub shoulders and rub elbows occasionally with people that are famous, the people that are on TV, and maybe they even get to be on TV sometimes, and people think that they're someone. And so what you have to understand about people like that is that they absolutely hate anyone who reminds them of where they come from. They are terrified. They are absolutely terrified of being confused with those people. They desperately want to fit in. Now, I understand this to a certain extent because when I went to Bucknell University, which is an Ivy League reject school, there's a lot of people there from prep schools. They're from Andover Academy, and on my one of my acquaintances on the hall was Brian Chap Ferguson from Phillips Exeter Academy and all this sort of thing. And they all have these they're not English accents, but they're sort of posh Boston Brahmin wannabe accents and so forth. And it was kind of funny because these people didn't know that Minneapolis is actually a pretty cool town. I grew up in the Minneapolis during the Prince years, and so it was a very cool place. It was definitely in fashion terms, it was a bit of a fashion-forward place, and it was kind of funny because some of my teammates on the track team, they knew that there was somebody coming in from Minnesota, and they weren't really sure where Minnesota was or anything. And so they said they were expecting, some sort of big lumberjack with a beard to come in. And, then in walks this guy who, with dyed blonde hair in the front, looks, at the time I looked like Duran Duran, all this sort of thing. And it was just not what they expected. Now, I did give in to the social expectations over time, and got the preppy haircut, got the blue wool sports coat, and the khaki slacks and all that sort of thing, the tie with the blue tie with the gold and white stripes, all that sort of stuff. But what was really funny was the next year, my best friend shows up. He's a year behind me. He's actually only 2 months younger, but he's a year behind me in school. And so he ended up coming there as well, enrolling there. And we were sitting in his room one night, and his friend who was from New Jersey said, it was kind of, he knew we were both from Minnesota, and he said, "Oh, so you guys are from Minnesota. Bet you do a lot of cow tipping there." And what was funny is that, you know, both my best friend and I were from the suburbs, and pretty well-off suburbs. And in fact, that very month, his next-door neighbor had been on the cover of Fortune magazine, because his next-door neighbor was the CEO of 3M at the time. So, anyhow, we had no idea what cow tipping was. And we were like, well, what do you mean, what's cow tipping? And it's like, oh, come on, you guys are just kidding me, right? Like, no, what on earth is cow tipping? And he said, well, you know, you sneak up to a cow when it's sleeping, and you tip it over. And we're like, do cows sleep on their feet? What are you talking about? And why would you ever do that to some poor cow? And it was kind of funny, because he suddenly realized, you know, he suddenly realized that, you know, he was considerably more the hick, so to speak, than we were. You know, we might not be from the East Coast, but we were certainly much more civilized, accustomed to civilized life and city life than he was. Now, the point is that we, you know, I understand that sort of the way they look down. The East Coast looks down on flyover country. I just didn't happen to be insecure about it. You know, we were pleased to be from Minnesota. You know, we like being from Minnesota. We like Minnesota. You know, what would there possibly be to be ashamed about? You know, okay, I mean, it's really, really freaking cold in the winter, and, you know, you have to pretty much be insane to live there in the winter, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. Why would you ever be ashamed of it, you know? And so, so anyhow, why do they look down? I don't know, honestly. I mean, I think, actually, my favorite story of this sort was, we went to a wedding in Minnesota once, and there was a woman there who was engaged to a guy from Montreal. And he was talking, and you could tell, I mean, you could just tell this guy was one of those types. You know, he's very pretentious. He was looking down at his nose at everyone and that sort of thing. And so we got introduced to him. He was like engaged to the sister of somebody we knew. And so my wife was talking to someone else. So I was just chatting with this guy. And, you know, we had just literally flown in from Europe that morning, because we moved to Europe, been living there for years at this point. And so this guy was telling me all about how Montreal was so much better than Minneapolis, and, you know, it's really a very European city, and it's very, you know, they speak French there, and it's so very cultural and this and that. So I was just, you know, listening politely, saying, oh, you know, great, that's nice, sounds like an interesting place. Right then, his fiance comes up and is like, oh, hey guys, I'm so glad you could make it. I heard you flew in from Europe this morning. And the guy suddenly looked a little concerned, and said, you flew in from you know, Europe. Where are you flying from? I said, oh, you know, Milano. He said, oh, well, what were you doing there? I was like, well, we live there. But tell me more about how you know, Montreal is such a European city. I'm actually quite curious. So, anyhow, my feeling is that the East Coast elites, and especially their wannabes, they derive a sense of personal value from being in one of these places that has status, that has, for what lack of a better term, geographical status. So, for example, you know, and everything's relative. So, you know, what's funny to me is how quickly people from anywhere from Utah to California to any number of other places, including Minneapolis, if they move to New York, guaranteed, within 18 months, they refer to themselves as being a New Yorker. And, they're a New Yorker now, and all this sort of thing. And it always cracks me up because, I know some folks. I know some folks who, were lifelong New Yorkers and that sort of thing. And they were uniformly much more reasonable and pleasant about it than all these RVists. And so, anyhow, and of course the real New Yorkers don't regard these people as real New Yorkers because, of course, A, they're not, and B, most of them don't stick around. Most of them eventually leave. So after they've had their big adventure in the big city. So, anyhow, and it's, of course, it's always interesting to see where is considered, socially more glamorous than others. So yes, this is essentially status signaling. And so, that's one thing that I personally kind of enjoy doing is, even though where we live, it is country. It is, there is, we're basically living in the European equivalent of Nebraska or whatever. But merely the fact that we live in Europe, tends to give a certain status in the eyes of a certain type of American, which I tend to find very funny. But it's the way it is, and so, it's ridiculous. But that's what's going on with these folks like Kevin Williamson. He's from some nothing little town somewhere, and he resents that. You got to keep in mind, for these folks, they have often worked very, very hard to get out of that. And so the very last thing they want is for anyone to think of them as being from that. And so, this is just absolutely obnoxious. This is ridiculous. I was talking about music with someone the other day, and we were talking about how some of the best songs are songs about people who love where they're from. Everybody, even people who have, I saw a band in Italy playing Sweet Home Alabama. People loved it. Most of the people don't even speak English, but they sense the love that was in that song, and so they can relate to that because they have that same love for their own hometown. And so, and there's a lot of good songs of that sort. I heard a song, it's kind of cool. There's a song, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a Swiss song, and it's a very nationalist Swiss song. And they actually sing it in all the different Swiss national languages. And it's very popular there. Baby metal. Somebody said about the Baby Metal concert in Tokyo Dome that it wasn't so much a concert as it was a triumph. It was, you could see people at this concert waving Japanese flags in Japan. Why? Because it's hometown pride. And so, there's a fundamental divide between that hometown love and the rootless globalism. And so, when Zuckerberg says the great struggle is going to be between nationalism, the great struggle is going to be against nationalism, that's right. It's the globalists It's the Kevin Williamsons, it's the Mark Zuckerbergs, it's the haters, it's the George Soroses, it's the people who hate where they're from and hate the people from their hometowns against the nationalists and against the people who have the capability for loving where they're from or where they are. And so, and in answer to the question, no, I was, as you can see from Wikipedia, I was born in Boston, and my native tribe is not from Minnesota. I would actually be quite pleased to be Ojibwe. I have some friends who are Chippewa, and in fact, my best friend went to, but anyhow, so the important thing is to understand these people, like Kevin Williamson, and these organizations, like National Review, hate their hometowns. They hate flyover country. They hate white America, and that's why you should not support them. I used to be a National Review subscriber years ago. I dropped it some time ago because I didn't like what National Review was doing. And also I didn't understand what National Review really, what their purpose really was. National Review's purpose is to play Praetorian Guard for the left. So, what's the drive of these people to desire controlling others? Well, they have to. They have no other purpose. And so, National Review is kind of an ironic name because they are anti-national. But the thing is, and it's been really it was encouraging to see people responding to Kevin Williamson today published a article begging people to donate money, because National Review has never ever made money since 1955. What does that tell you? There is no market for it. National Review, to paraphrase Kevin Williamson, National Review does not pull its own weight and deserves to die. And so, how are they still in business? They're propped up. They're propped up by people like Jeff Bezos, who are of the sort of, moderately conservative type. They weren't surviving from government funds. They were surviving from big businessmen who were willing to pay them in order to keep them around. They're all propped up. All these things, what's interesting is that now, because the media is failing, now they're having to prop up the mainstream media as well. The conservative media has always been propped up. If you remember, they used to complain about the Washington Times being the Mooney paper because the Reverend Sun Myung Moon propped it up. And so now you've got folks like Bezos, you've got folks like Slim, what's his name, the Mexican. They're propping up the Washington Post and New York Times. The Guardian is propped up by a $1 billion fund that has lost 7/10 of its money so far on massive Guardian losses. So what you can expect is within the next 5 years, the Guardian will probably be purchased by some globalist billionaire just to prop it up. I think that National Review is worse because it's more widely seen as a conservative organization, which it's not. The Weekly Standard, I think most people would have no idea what it's supposed to be. If it's just another mainstream media, left liberal organization, who cares? How do we answer those who say Christianity is a globalist religion because of well, you answer it with the Bible. God talks about the nations. The nations must exist for Christianity to be correct. God destroyed the Tower of Babel. Globalism is the new Babel. So Christianity has nothing to do with globalism. In fact, Christians are more concerned about globalism than most because they've been waiting. I mean, all you got to do is talk to evangelicals about who the Antichrist might be. They all are watching the globalists like a hawk. So, we'll talk about the British election some other time. I don't really know what's going on there. Yeah, and in fact, I should note that if you look at the EU Tower I'm not sure if it's in Brussels or Strasbourg, but if you look at the EU's main building, it is a intentional imitation of a medieval painting of, it's in Brussels, okay. It's an imitation of the painting of the Tower of Babel. You can see it. It is a open rejection of Christianity. It is a open altar or temple to Satan. That's what it is. And so, you need to be aware that, this stuff is not conspiracy theory. This stuff is literally stuck right in front of your face. So, anyhow, I think that the reason, it's not hard to understand why you're openly saying EU. No, I'm not. I don't know about the founders of the EU, but there's definitely people in power in the EU who are. There's no question about that at all. I mean, they practically shout it out in their symbolism. And so these things are not accidents. It was, one thing that was interesting. I was reading a book about. I was reading one of Umberto Eco's books, and Umberto Eco talked about how bizarre it was at this London World Fair that all of the semiotics, all of the symbols, were Neo-Babylonian. He's like, he didn't understand what all this Babylonian stuff was doing in London. And so, these are the realities. This is nothing secret. I'm not saying anything that's new. It's all right there in the open. And I'm a Christian. I do believe that the Tower of Babel fell before. Remember, God created the nations. And so any attempt to destroy the nations and rule the world, that is the act of, the one that Jesus called the prince of this world. It's to bring the whole world under his dominion again. But that will not succeed. That will not succeed because, God has said it won't. And so, anyhow, this is we've kind of gotten a long way away from the original point. But the original point that I wanted to make is that, if you're conservative, don't be fooled by the cucks and the churchians and those who call themselves the conservative media. They are not on your side. They are just there to keep you from... they're there to basically try to moderate you, to try to keep you within the pen. And they want to keep you away from what they call the extremists. They want to, right now, they are desperate to keep you from supporting Trump and to keep you out of the alt-right. All right? So, it is just yet another sign of the inevitability of the alt-right. And so, And you see it everywhere. You know, almost all the right-wing media, or what they'll call in the center-right political parties, all of them are there to try to sort of defang the right. They're not there to advance the right. They're not there to advance the right. They're there to basically guard the right flank of the left. And so, if you haven't read it, if you're not familiar with this, I strongly recommend you read my book, Cuckservative. I wrote it with John Red Eagle. And if you read this, you know, you will understand a lot of the reason for the failure of the conservative movement in the United States. Okay? It makes it clear. I mean, we go back to the beginning. We go back to Russell Kirk and you know, the 10 pillars of conservatism and so forth, and we show that current conservatives have not stuck by those 10 points, and we've also shown that it's not a proper ideology in the first place. So, so anyhow, I you know, read it. I mean, the back says, 50 years ago, America was lied to and betrayed by its leaders. That's what happened. You know, and it's a warning. It will help in the UK a bit. It does actually address British conservatism a little bit. You know, and it's a warning from 2 Native Americans about what white Americans have to address and have to be concerned about. Yes, I do believe in the 14 words. I included them intentionally in the 16 points of the alt-right. You know, I am an American Indian, and I believe very firmly that the existence of the white race is important and is vital, both for the survival of Western civilization, as well as for the benefit of humanity. You know, I mean, after Christianity, the single most important thing that we have ever developed in the history of man is arguably Western civilization. And the white race is you know, the European nations is how I prefer to put it, because outside of America, the whole white thing is a little bit, it's not really as common a expression. But, you know, I mean, and it's not strange. It's not strange for one group of people to value another. I spent 6 months in Japan. I used to speak the Japanese language at a conversational level, and I highly value Japanese culture. I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. You know, I mean, you know, I'm kitsune. You know, I love baby metal. There's no reason whatsoever not to support and respect and defend other peoples, and that's the importance of omni-nationalism. Well, I can tell you the Tale of Genji. I've read this 2.5 times, and the translation is Arthur Waley. So, yeah, the one that I didn't read quite as successfully is this one, reading Japanese. You know, I could read hiragana and katakana, and I think I only ever learned about 200 kanji. In order to be considered like literate at the like most basic level, you need to know about 3,000. So I never got there. anyhow, the point that I'm trying to make is that globalism versus nationalism is the big issue. All the other issues are secondary. So stay focused on the nationalist issue. Support the nationalists. Do not support the globalists. Not even the petty globalists like National Review and so forth. So, anyhow, that's all we have time for tonight. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for supporting Castelia House. And we will look forward to seeing you soon.